If it does contribute at all to your world outlook and how you do work, does being a Canadian contribute to that at all?
Well, the interesting thing is, I grew up in Canada. I was born in Canada. But my family actually came to the States in 1627, which I found out after the fact. I talked to my father when I got my green card, and he said, oh, yeah, I was going to get my passport because, our family came over here hundreds of years ago. And the hilarious thing is, my time in Canada has really sort of given me an outlook. Oh, my dog, here you go. Has given me an outlook I think is unique because not only am I an immigrant to the U.S., but being raised in Canada, you sort of have that Lester Pearson view of the world, where you don't really pick sides and you don't really have an agenda. You're just trying to figure out why the hell people are shooting at each other.
Exactly. And speaking of that, what led you to do the most recent book that you did?
Well, License to Kill is really a continuation of my fascination with new tribes, and it may sound funny, but I used to do expeditions, and I used to go into places like Borneo and Africa looking for lost tribes, dying out tribes, whatever you want to call them, and sort of weird subsets of society. And then it sort of expanded into weirder subsets like jihadis, rebels, mercenaries, and then contractors I thought were simply the latest form of tribe, sort of group of guys that were united by background and purpose but didn't have any hard structure to what they did, but they had very similar outlooks. And that's when I launched off on my latest expedition to find out who these people were.
And was it hard to get access to them, or did you find them? I mean, there's this notion that it's a shadowy element, but in the book I found that they almost were eager to show what they did.
Well, it's physically impossible to get access to these guys now because not necessarily because of their shadowiness, but their clients don't want journalists running around because typically the reaction is negative, and also they don't want to compromise their tactics and security. I just happen to have a number of people who worked in this industry who knew who I was. And I remember being with Blackwater, and this one particular guy, he was very standoffish. He wore all black and had skulls and everything, including his arms and neck and chest. About a week in, he came to me all sort of like a kid, like, oh my God, you're that guy. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, dude, you wrote that book. That's my favorite book. Why didn't you tell me you were him? Perception is part of that. I mean, those guys all want to be like me when they grow up, I guess.
That's great.
That gave me some entree. Plus, I think having entrees to companies like Blackwater, which just simply does not allow people to hang out with them, was really a way of them saying, well, you understand what we do, and you're not going to cast judgment on us just because we're running around with guns in a war zone. So.
I know generally you try to stay away from politics.
Politics are really interesting to me because when you cross sides in a war and you meet relatives who are fighting other relatives and you listen to all the rhetoric and the dogma, these people forget that at some point they're all going to have to make up and be friends. So politics is what divides people. It's very rarely unifying them where I go.
I just noticed that Congress is only just starting to now understand the impact of private security contractors and private military contractors.
Right.
Do you think that they have any hope of being able to legislate or enforce laws or conventions to regulate the rules of engagement?
You can, but that's ridiculous. That's like child soldiers or any other outcome of conflict. When you see these militias, these sort of ad hoc paramilitary groups, whether they be corporations or death squads or whatever, they're always a result of chaos. I mean, that's like legislating child soldiers and saying, okay, this new law applies to Liberia. Well, who's going to enforce it?
So it will ultimately always appear to be kind of an unregulated free-for-all? Does that sound like a...
No, the point I make in my book, which I think is very clear, that the reason why a government, democratic institution goes to the private sector is for two basic reasons. One, for competence, and the second one is to keep it out of the legislative process. And that's why we use companies like Air America in Laos. That's why we use paramilitaries and contractors when we look for bin Laden. It just cut through a lot of red tape and questions. And then when the shit hits the fan, they can all say, well, I don't know, I didn't hire them. They screwed up, and the companies themselves can turn around and fire their employees who are contractors and say, I don't know what the hell he was thinking when he did that.
So do you think like the governments can use it as a way to exonerate themselves from any...
You're being far too polite. That's exactly why they do that. It's exactly why the government is just mired in bureaucracy and accountability and reporting and red tape. People have to account for every minute of their time and every penny they spend. When you have to get things done, you go outside. Now, these people, yes, there are, restrictions and regulations in terms of contracting, but the idea of protecting Paul Bremer, who was in himself a freelance employee, by a group of hired guns in a chaotic environment like Iraq should point out to people that, we're no different than the Romans in terms of hiring mercenaries to regulate unruly places. We can't do it legally anymore.